Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai ki te whare wananga o Waitaha, ko ao te tumu tuarua rangahau, ko Ian Wright taku ingwa kia ora. As John mentioned, my name is Ian Wright and I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Research and Innovation, and I welcome you to this event at the University of Canterbury. And I can see a lot of buzz in the room, 16 prospective people are going to give their either PhD or master's thesis presentations. I can also see some nervous and supportive supervisors in the room, which is also a good thing. This competition is a very key skill, and I think you've got to just remember where you might be going in the future, and just think about the opportunity if you know, some years in advance, about if you're stuck in the lift with the Minister of Finance for 3 minutes, what would you say? You know, what would you be saying to him or her about your research is critical? Here is the gist of it in lay people's terms, and you make the convincing argument. So this is what this is about. Enough from me, good luck.
Buddha said, we are what we think. With our thoughts, we make the world. We all have our own perceptions of the world, our own worldviews, about what issues we face and what goals we should strive for as a society. So like the green screen behind me, sometimes we make our very own reality. Like a blockbuster movie, they may be different from our friends and our neighbours and family. So while Donald Trump might believe in a world without climate change, the rest of us in this room might disagree. My name's Joy Kemper, and I'm a PhD student in marketing, and I'm absolutely fascinated by the concept of worldviews, specifically in how to integrate marketing and sustainability, considering that the worldviews, their objectives and their goals behind these concepts are quite different and contradictory. One is about consuming more, the other about consuming less and differently. So I interviewed marketing academics from around the world who were interested in sustainability, and asked them to reflect on how these concepts can be integrated and what the key barriers are towards this integration. They said to me that one of the key barriers were a lack of knowledge in the faculty body of sustainability, as well as a lack of support from the heads of department to integrate sustainability within research and teaching, as well as even resistance of the marketing academic community, especially in publishing in this type of research. They also reflected on the worldviews of both faculty and students, specifically in how these people actually saw the relationship between the economy and the environment. So to investigate this even further, I surveyed over 400 marketing faculty and 300 marketing students to actually see their worldviews. And what I found, I think, is quite interesting. While everyone had very positive attitudes towards sustainability, had holistic conceptualization of sustainability itself, so beyond the environmental dimension, and looking at social issues, such as social progress that meets the needs of everyone. Over 40% of these people were actually ambivalent to sustainability issues. And also there was a difference between worldviews in faculty and students. So while students actually had a greater belief than faculty that there were consumption issues in the world, that marketing helped create artificial wants, as well as that we as a society focus far too much on economic growth rather than social welfare. These students actually had a lesser belief than faculty that business had an obligation towards society to actually help contribute beyond profit maximization. So this is a little bit disconcerting, because it goes to show that while faculty and students might need more education, especially in the business discipline on sustainability itself, it also shows that the future marketing and business professionals might actually unable to actually see how sustainability is able to be addressed through their profession. So the green screen can actually show our ability to see the world in different ways, but also hinders our ability to effectively see the issues and how to effectively address them. Thank you.
I'm sure all of you know that cancer is a very widespread and serious disease. The odds are that 1 in 3 New Zealanders will either have it themselves or know someone who will have it in their lives, and that's the equivalent to the first 5 rows in this room. Even though outcomes are improving for patients with many different types of cancer, there's still a lot that we don't know. Early stage cancer tumours contain varied oxygen concentrations, like the one on the top left, and that's because they grow so fast that the blood vessels can't keep up. Oxygen is very important, and it impacts the way anti-cancer drugs work, because patients with low oxygen tumours are more likely to experience drug resistance and a worse outcome. So in order to design drugs that work for this kind of tumour, we need to mimic the tumour environments outside the body. That means including the oxygen environment, which is currently ignored. So it's my job to incorporate oxygen control into a system capable of growing cancer cells and testing cancer drugs in miniature. So this is a microchannel on the bottom right. It's a small tube encased in a clear plastic. In this case, it's 1 millimetre wide, the width of a human hair high, and a few centimetres long. I grow cancer cells on the base of this channel in a sheet 1 cell thick, and then pass 2 liquid media streams over the cells through the channel. This liquid media feeds the cells with nutrients and oxygen, each one of the 2 streams having a different dissolved oxygen concentration, one low and the other high. So in order to test drugs on this, we need to look at the infrared to see the, So the cancer cells are sitting on a fluorescent film, which is a sensor. It shines brightly for low oxygen and dimly for high oxygen. So to see the different dissolved oxygen regions that we've made, we look at the infrared, and with the visible light, we can see the cells themselves. So far, I've seen that the cancer cells look different on the lower oxygen side. The next stage is to add anti-cancer drugs to each stream to assess how the availability of oxygen affects how well the drugs work. This system effectively mimics the oxygen environment, similar to that of a real cancer tumour. It could be used to improve current drug discovery and testing tools, or it could be used among many, many other applications to try and discover why low oxygen causes drug resistance. Thank you.
Girls like dolls, so boys can't. This binary is reinforced even when it's being rejected. So we'll say something like, Susie's not like the other girls because Susie likes trucks. Before we learn to speak, on some level we already know what it means to talk like a boy or to sound feminine, to embody our gender in our voices. But what happens if somebody doesn't fit into this gender binary, into these boxes labeled man and woman? This person, a non-binary person, is still living in the same world, they're still being taught the same rules, and they're still getting their Christmas presents from the pink aisle or the blue aisle. How does a non-binary person act and speak like a non-binary person when all of the rules are about men and women? That's my research question, and the answer, I think, is mixed signals. When you only have 2 options, you can combine them to create something new, the way you can take blue and pink and make purple. So for example, we're taught that mustaches are male and that dresses are female, even though we do know that women can have mustaches and men can wear dresses. But we can imagine that someone with both a mustache and a dress might be sending a mixed signal. These mixed signals exist within language too. So let's say I'm non-binary and I'm speaking to somebody who assumes that I'm a man. I know from my experiences that a higher pitch and a wider pitch range is seen as more feminine, so I may try changing my voice in that way. If, however, the person assumes that I'm a woman, I may drop my pitch, reduce that range, and attempt to speak more flatly. Both of these strategies represent a mixed signal, a kind of middle ground based on subverting somebody's expectations about gender and language. So I'm studying these mixed signals by creating what's called a corpus, a database of speech. I found non-binary people, and I've recorded them in a variety of everyday conversations. We've also had one-on-one interviews where I've asked them about their experience of gender, their history, and some of the strategies they have in presenting a non-binary identity. My PhD research is a combined study of these narratives and insights together with an acoustic analysis of the specific sounds and variation within their speech, like pitch. I'm studying this because everything is a signal. Everything that we do is a way to present ourselves to the world, to say this is who I am. For non-binary people, mixed signals represent a strategy of unboxing their gender from the binary, of using the tools they have available to them to say, no, I'm not that, or that, I'm me. Thank you.
Imagine a farm with sheep and cows, valleys and hills. My fist is a hill. An earthquake happens and it shakes the hill, and that causes a landslide that blocks the river below. And the river cuts down through that landslide over hours or days or weeks, and it floods the valley downstream. And if there's a power line across that valley and it gets damaged or knocked over, then the dairy shed up the hill isn't going to run. And if the farmer doesn't have a generator or their neighbors can't help out, the cows don't get milked. And they have to be milked twice a day. Imagine that same hill. The earthquake happens and it shakes the hill and nothing happens. But 6 months later, the annual heavy winter rains come, and a hill that has stood through decades of heavy rain suddenly has a landslide that blocks the river below, and the river cuts down through the landslide. It floods the valley downstream. It knocks over the power lines. The dairy has no electricity, so the cows don't get milked. That's cascading hazards. It's this idea that one hazard can trigger another, which triggers another, just like dominoes. Sometimes they all fall at once, and sometimes the domino just sort of hovers there until another line comes around, and it's black and it's white, and with a bit of a delay, it falls over. After the Hurunuri Kaikoura earthquake sequence last November, farms throughout North Canterbury that had been impacted by the earthquakes were also impacted by cascading hazards. In New Zealand, we don't actually have a farm-scale earthquake impact model, so the Christchurch urban impact model was applied to many farms. Imagine a house on a 1/4 hectare of land and a 200-hectare sheep and dairy farm. I want you to remember that somebody lives in this house. It is their home. Somebody lives on this farm. It's their home. It's also where they work and probably where their parents and their grandparents worked and lived. So when you tell the person who lives in this house that they should probably move because there's a fault for the property or a landslide threatening the house, you're asking them to give up their home, which is something most will do begrudgingly. But when you ask the farmer to leave because there's a fault or landsliding or liquefaction or all three, you're asking them to give up their home, their livelihood, their lifestyle, their livestock, and their roots. And for many farmers, that's unacceptable. Given the scale difference between a farm and a house and the hazardous nature of farming, it makes sense to try and consider another approach. Perhaps moving the components of the farm around to avoid the hazard, changing the land use. With this idea in mind, I'm going into the Hurunuri district, and I'm speaking to farmers, community groups and organizations about the impacts of the earthquakes and cascading hazards on farms, focusing specifically on land use before the earthquake, land use after, how long-term land use plans have changed. Taking all this information, I'm using it to develop a framework, a model, a tool to help farmers in rural communities mitigate the impact of cascading hazards, earthquakes, and other disasters. Thank you.
There once was a small cleaning robot working its way through the day at the shopping mall while a bunch of engineers were conducting a field experiment with a larger and way more sophisticated robot nearby. Things, however, did not quite go as planned that day, as the engineers turned around and found the small robot being harassed by mall visitors. Without any provocation from the robot's side, it's found its way impeded by visitors. People verbally abused it, and some even went and slapped and kicked it around. My name is Merel Keizers, and my thesis is about the two main questions that arose on that day. First of all, what is going on in the minds of these people as they try to bully a robot which they know is just an insentient being? And second of all, how do we stop them from doing so and prevent the damage to the robot and the hazardous situations that may arise? And those are important issues, as it has been estimated that 2 to 3 decades from now, robots will outnumber people in the workforce, and for many of those jobs, they will have to deal with people on a daily basis. For example, when they drive taxis, when they are nurses, or when they carry us or our grandparents or our parents to the bed in a nursing home. We are on the brink of a robotized society, and we have to learn how to deal with robot bullying sooner rather than later. Now, the first thing we have to keep in mind when talking about human-robot interaction is that we humans respond to robots as if they were human beings. By that I mean that both our brains, also our physiological responses, our cognition, our affect, and even our behavior indicates that we treat robots as if they were to some extent human-like. Our mirror neurons start firing away when we see a robot make a certain movement, just like they would if we would see the human make a movement. We feel sorry for a robot if it's being kicked by a hammer, and if a robot doesn't conform to implicit social norms while playing a game, we will punish him just like we would punish a human being. So it makes sense to look into human and human aggression if we want to explain human and robot aggression. Now, human and human aggression is preceded by a psychological process called dehumanization. We perceive our victim to be less capable of cognition and affect, and then we can behave in a bad way towards them without feeling bad about ourselves, because we don't have to feel that empathy. In my thesis, I will study the influence of dehumanization on human-robot aggression, and based on these results, I will develop new ways to make robots behave in such a way that they discourage robot bullying behavior. And 3 years from now, when I'm done, we'll be a little bit more ready for the brink of that robotized society that is in front of us. Thank you very much.
Let me start with a question. Do you know that you can invest in agricultural commodities also, just like you invest in shares in a stock market? Yes or no? No. Okay. There is a way now. You can invest in agricultural commodities like corn, coffee, etc. But keep in mind, you don't have to buy the coffee stock and keep it with you and store the coffee in your place. Rather than that, what you can do is, you can invest your money in a investment fund, where the fund manager will invest that money in a coffee index, which will ultimately give you the same exposure. So, exchange traded commodities, which I will be studying in this chapter or in my study, is a kind of an investment fund which gives you the opportunity to invest in commodities. And they track the performance of a commodity index. And because of this easiness to get exposure to these commodities, these funds have become very popular, and this industry has achieved a tremendous growth during the last decade. But the previous studies, they have found that the exchange traded funds in equity market, that is related to stocks, these funds are not exactly replicating their underlying index. So as a result of that, they found that there is a tracking error. And we know, with related to agricultural commodity prices also, these prices are highly volatile. So what will happen if fund managers are tempted to over-invest or under-invest in certain commodities during these commodity booms and busts? So my study is about, do agricultural commodity exchange traded funds perform efficiently during booms and busts in commodity prices? So I will be studying it using 3 simple methods. First, we are going to identify the booms and busts in commodity prices. Second, I'm going to measure the performance of an exchange traded fund using the daily tracking error. And finally, we are going to test the significance of the daily tracking error during the booms and busts in commodity prices. And my study covers 84 exchange traded commodities which are traded on London and Switzerland stock exchanges. And my study period covers the data from the inception of each fund until 4th November 2016, on which date I have collected my data. And I have completed this study, and my findings conclude that agricultural exchange traded commodities perform efficiently during booms and busts in commodity prices. In fact, it tells you that fund managers do what they promise to their investors. Thank you.
Imagine there's no heaven. No, I'm not about to break into song, nor am I about to preach to you. And what I really want you to imagine is a world where we no longer rely on fossil fuels. No more petrol for cars, no more diesel for trucks, no more jet fuel for planes. In the words of John Lennon, it's easy if you try. And it's also easy to imagine the benefits. Everyone is well aware of climate change and where we are heading with our current emissions. Everyone except for maybe Trump and his supporters. But push that horrible image out of your mind, go back to that perfect world where we've severed our reliance on fossil fuels. It's all good and well to imagine, but how do we actually achieve this? Well, that's where my research comes in. My research focuses on the synthesis of large polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. Now, that was quite a mouthful. What I'm talking about is an area of chemistry where the molecules resemble chicken wire, like you see up in the centre. Now, these hexagons that make up my chicken wire molecules are really, really tiny, however. If you make a circle with your thumb and forefinger, that is about the size of the hexagon in regular chicken wire. The hexagons that make up my molecules are 500 million times smaller than that. Now, that's an incredibly hard scale to grasp, so let's flip that on its head. And if you take that same ring, expand it by that same scale, 500 million, you would have a huge ring able to encompass the Earth side by side twice. Now, these molecules can have a whole heap of interesting properties, all dependent on how many of those hexagons there are and how they're arranged. This is something that, as an organic chemist, I control through bottom-up synthesis. I take the smaller building blocks, I combine them together to make the larger molecules that I am interested in. By now you're probably wondering what on earth all these hexagons and chicken wire molecules have to do with energy and fossil fuel. Well, the molecules that I'm synthesizing in particular have the potential to double the efficiency of solar cells. Now, solar cells work by absorbing a photon of light as energy from the sun and converting that into an electron. Now, regular solar cells absorb one photon per electron that they give out. The molecules I'm making in my PhD undergo a special exciting process known as singlet fission, turning one photon into 2 electrons, doubling the efficiency. Just imagine a world where we no longer rely on fossil fuels. With this bright idea, it's easy if you try.
So, whenever we move fast with a cup of coffee in our hands, there's a high risk of spilling it. Why is that? In technical terms, we say the coffee gets into resonance with our walking movements. If you're not familiar with the term resonance, then think about sitting in a swing. If you always move your legs at the right time, you transfer more and more energy into the swing and you get higher and higher. For coffee, we want to avoid such a resonance, and we have 3 major solutions for that. Solution number 1 is we slow down our speed and reduce the energy transfer. Solution number 2 is we put a lid on our cup, which is kind of the favorite solution for coffee to go. And solution number 3 is we're coffee ninjas and balance our cup. What does this have to do with an orbital rocket like New Zealand's Electron here in the background? The Electron rocket has massive tanks with a lot of fuel in it. And the fuel can get into resonance with the rocket movements on its way into orbit. Fuel slushing is actually such a serious problem that even big companies or agencies like NASA and SpaceX have lost some very expensive rockets due to slosh resonance. If we now transfer our 3 coffee solutions to our rocket, then we see that solution number 1, slowing down the speed, is obviously not a great idea. Instead, all companies use solution number 2, the lid solution. And they do that by changing the structure of the tanks, which means they add ring structures, so-called baffles, into the tanks, which dampen the slosh, down to a more harmless behavior to avoid resonance. The only problem with that solution is that these ring structures are not only very heavy, but also very expensive in contrast to our free coffee lids. That's why my research goes for solution number 3, the ninja solution. I'm going to upgrade the flight controller or brain of our rocket by first identifying our slosh and rocket motion behaviors, and then by upgrading the flight control strategy to avoid resonance. All in all, it's about doing the right movements at the right time. In summary, my PhD used mathematical algorithms instead of additional mechanical heavy parts to handle the fuel sloshing, which will make our Electron rocket here much cheaper and more energy efficient. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sarish Khan, and I'm doing my PhD in anthropology. Now, since time is of the essence, I'm going to jump straight into my presentation and begin by talking about what I'm doing my research in. So the title of my research is Crossing Boundaries, Exploring the Importance and Interplay of Identity and Location among second-generation Indian and Pakistani Muslim migrants. My central research question is, how do second generations of Indian and Pakistani Muslim migrants negotiate between their religious identity and their national or cultural identity when living in geographical locations far removed from their ethnic origins? I will answer this question by doing a comparative study across two locations, London in England and Dubai in the UAE. Some further questions I want to explore are, how is Islam practiced in London and Dubai? So, what does it mean to be a Muslim? Also, how is national or cultural identity expressed in these two cities? So, what does it actually mean to be an Indian or Pakistani living abroad? Now, why do this research? Well, it allows us to gain a better understanding of immigrant populations, intergenerational disconnects, and Islam in the current landscape of global politics. The current landscape of global politics as of 2017 is such that it warrants issues of identity and belonging being studied, especially with Trump being elected and the recent Muslim ban in the United States. Also, the recent terror attacks that happened in London over the summer. We can see that it is a particularly precarious time for Muslim communities worldwide. Now, the beauty of this research is that it also has the potential to be replicated to study other immigrant societies. For example, we could study second-generation Chinese immigrants in New Zealand or second-generation Syrian refugees in Europe. Lastly, how will I do this research? I will be using the anthropological method of inquiry called analytic autoethnography. Autoethnography, as the name suggests, is where the researcher is a full member of the research group or setting and is committed to a better theoretical understanding of broader social phenomena. This basically means that I am part of the population that I am studying and representing in my research, thus providing a unique first-hand insider's perspective. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's my what, why, and how, and I hope you enjoy the journey of my 3 years in 3 minutes. Thank you.
Kia ora, I'm Caroline Obonyo, and I'll talk about mobile learning for future teachers to describe my thesis research. If I may ask, how do teacher educators facilitate mobile learning? And teacher educators are the lecturers who are preparing student teachers to go and teach in this type of classrooms, where we're currently talking about integrating digital technologies into New Zealand school curriculum. So how do the teacher educators do it? Mobile learning has been identified as one of the 6 important developments in educational technologies. And mobile technologies increases efficiency and effectiveness in teaching and learning. And mobile learning entails engaging students in educational activities using mobile devices. But I saw a gap within the literature and lack of empirical research in teacher education. And I realized the need to understand how teacher educators facilitate mobile learning, because studies have revealed that teacher educators find it difficult to introduce innovative teaching techniques. And that is why I was motivated to investigate these practices in teacher education programs in one university here in New Zealand. Through purposive sampling, I will interview the teacher educators, observe their classes, have the student teachers participate in a survey, as well as review some of the documents. And I'm being guided by the mobile pedagogical framework. This conceptual framework is good because it clearly outlines the practices that teacher educators need to use. when facilitating mobile learning. For example, engaging students in collaborative activities with their peers could be locally or globally. So, in reality, this is a shift from the traditional approach of teaching to the 21st century style of teaching and learning, where we are talking about innovative teaching techniques and pedagogical transformation. And mobile learning is part of that. My thesis research is not about technologies, but how technologies are integrated with pedagogy. Thank you.
What do you see in this picture behind me?
Shadows!
Exactly. You might say shadows, but only shadows? Actually, there are many things that you cannot see, but don't worry, I will tell you. These are the shadows of some international students that at that moment were not on university campus. Some of them were wearing traditional clothes. Some of them are married, some are older than others. Now tell me, what do you see in this picture? What is interesting here is why you were not able to see what I just described. The answer is pretty simple. It's because this picture is hiding almost everything. Currently, there is plenty numeric and very superficial information on international students and their academic success. There is a need for going deeper into the analysis and covering what is hidden and overlooked. But how to do that if you may find it difficult sometimes? My research is taking a different approach. Using phenomenology, is trying to explore international students' perspective of factors influencing success at university. Students are given a voice to tell their stories, developing in-depth interpretations of how they make sense of their own work. I've been collecting data from international undergraduate students, using interviews and analyzing pieces of art and writing these students used to help express their ideas. And so far, I have some interesting preliminary findings. First, success at university seems to be related but not limited to the academic performance. Second, the official designation of being an international student is based on visa status and hence enrollment status. But students have different understandings. For example, from their perspective, being an international student might be determined by the student's background and the type of challenges these students face in the host country, rather than their legal status in the country. Also, there are different groups or segments of international students. And finally, there are multiple and interrelated factors of personal, social, and institutional order influencing success. What I want to do is to provide a framework for institutions like university to understand success among international students, and thus encourage actions to enhance these students' abilities to accomplish their goals at university. But again, how to do that? Why not get a better understanding by looking beyond the surface? Thank you.
When you hear about Africa, what comes into your mind? Perhaps it is what is shown in my slide. That Africa is a continent plagued by the world's deadliest epidemics, HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, and others. Individuals infected with these diseases require continuous treatment and long-term care. And to achieve this, their health information must be efficiently managed. This challenge of quality health data management is driving healthcare providers in developing countries to digitize health information. Unfortunately, this has heightened concerns about the privacy of health information. According to recent studies, most individuals fear that their health information will be made public when digitized. These concerns are genuine because in developing countries, many health conditions are heavily stigmatized, and the disclosure of one's infection can mean the difference between life and death. An example is the case of these children, babies we have in my slide. It is thus important to ask what are the factors that can influence individuals to disclose their health information to seek needed health care in a context where their health information is digitized. This is the question I seek to address. And to do this, I propose a model which simply argues that the decision to disclose health information results from a cost-benefit analysis where individuals disclose information when benefit exceeds cost. So my model includes benefit factors. For example, reduced waiting time in seeking care that drives individuals to disclose their information, and cost factors, for example, the likelihood that my information I will lose my privacy, and these cost factors deter individuals from disclosing their information. I use the survey method to test my model, and the context of my study is the digitized healthcare environment in Ghana. Individuals will answer a questionnaire which asks their perceptions about the cost and benefit factors that influence their decision to disclose health information to seek healthcare. To test my model, I will use the partial least square technique to analyze my model statistically. It is hoped that with the findings of my study will produce insight that will enable practitioners and healthcare providers in developing countries to take appropriate actions to address the concerns individuals have about computerized healthcare and encourage their information disclosure to seek needed healthcare and to ensure the better provision of health for the populations in developing countries. Thank you.
Imagine you're driving on the road and you're late to your sister's surprise birthday party. You're freaking out, you're really late. So you pick up your cell phone to call your mum to tell her you won't be there when expected. And as you hang up, you realise there's a cop car behind you who's seen you and is pulling you over. So you pull over, and the cop gets out, and you take a good look at him, and you realise, you know what, he's like a little bit darker. And you're freaking out, you're late, you're even more late now, and you just want to put your best foot forward. So he comes over, you wind down the window, and you say, kia ora. So here's a question. If you said hello, would it make a difference to the size of the ticket that you got, or if you even got a ticket at all? There's this problem in justice systems around the world, and that ethnic minorities are overrepresented in arrests and jail and statistics generally. I'm sure you've all heard of the Black Lives Matter campaign. In 2015, the New Zealand Police Commissioner admitted that our police have an unconscious bias towards Māori. So, like other countries around the world, New Zealand has been trying to diversify their task force. There's this idea that if the front line is more similar culturally, ethically, situationally to the community that they police, then maybe there'll be a bit less discrimination. But what actually leads to this discrimination? We know certain characteristics like skin colour can, but what about voice? How much can a person's voice activate stereotypical ethnic categorisation? We don't know. And that's what my master's research is about, determining how much a person's voice can act as an ethnic identifier, and in turn, how the New Zealand police respond to different ethnicities. If I'm an officer who identifies as an ethnic minority, or as more than one ethnicity, how does that relate to how I do my job? What does diversifying the police force actually mean? And part of my research will be running an experiment with the New Zealand Police. In particular, I'll be looking at 3 different police regions with different prominent ethnicities, Auckland City, Waikato and Canterbury. And I'll be running an online task with police in urban stations to compare how they do their job. They'll be told they've just pulled over a car for using a mobile phone, and then they'll hear an audio clip. And the audio clip will be the same sentence but said in either a New Zealand European accent, a New Zealand Māori accent, or a New Zealand Asian accent. And I'll compare how they respond and what charges they give. I'll evaluate if we get a difference between police of different ethnicities, or if they view different voices differently as a function of their own ethnic background and training location. This would allow us to see whether a voice can imply ethnicity, which would help with training and help This would help us with organising training to help combat discrimination. And importantly, this research will also shed light on the success of police diversification and help create a fairer and more just New Zealand society. Yeah, thank you.
Eight-year-old Timmy is sad. His brother swore at him, and these words have landed right in Timmy's heart. But Timmy has already learned the cultural norm that exists in his family, that real men don't cry. What does Timmy do with his sadness? If he expresses it, he runs the risk of being ridiculed. So instead, he holds the tears in and pretends to the outside world he's okay, when on the inside, he's not. Timmy takes his sadness to school, where it bumps into all the other feelings that are circulating in school classrooms and playgrounds. Somehow, primary and intermediate school teachers have to manage these often hidden emotional experiences. They feel a deep responsibility to their students. They know that New Zealand has the highest teenage suicide rate in developed countries, and children as young as 10 are taking their own lives. In my ethnographic study, teachers have told me that while their formal training emphasises the need for behaviour management, they have not been equipped with skills to help children understand their feelings. In interviews, they share that classroom life is an emotional roller coaster, where the moods and behaviours of the children affect their temperament as much as the teacher's temperament affects the moods of the kids. 8 to 12-year-old children have shared with me via journaling that they experience in the classroom anything from high excitement to deep sadness and loneliness. I've witnessed this struggle in classroom observations, and Karen Barad, a post-humanist, calls this entanglement of emotional energy. We know the rhetoric of a school is to help prepare students for their future. Teaching, arithmetic, reading, writing are fundamental skills that we would never question. But we live in a deeply complex and rapidly changing world that is evoking many challenging emotions for adults and children. So surely it is equally important to help teach children to understand their emotions. What skills would teachers need if they were to help Timmy heal his sadness? What's going to happen if they don't? I fear our mental health statistics for youth are only going to get worse.
People sometimes ask me what aeronautical linguistics is. Actually, they don't. Nobody ever asks me that. Usually I have to raise the subject, and I find that the best way to get people's attention is actually to tap into their neuroses by asking such awkward questions as this one on my PowerPoint. Flying is the safest way to travel. It's just not as safe as you think it is. And one of the reasons for that is because pilots and air traffic controllers have to speak to each other in English. And on international flights, they'll be doing that for the most part in English. In 2001, it was decided that poor language proficiency was getting people killed. And since this is bad for business, a global system of aviation English testing was established. Unfortunately, every country retains the sovereign right to choose or develop the test or tests that they wish to use to assess their aeronautical personnel. And the research shows us that we can have very little faith in the quality of some of those tests. And we know that pilots, time and time again, will actually fail an aviation English test, walk out the door, go down the road and take a different test for the purposes of passing it. So the first part of my thesis is going to show that this is actually a problem. And I'm doing a quantitative survey of 3,000 pilots and air traffic controllers, along with a qualitative survey of the test providers themselves. But the meat of the PhD will focus on examining the effect of the aeronautical context on language production and reception. So for example, I'm going to get pilots to listen to an aeronautical transmission and have them assess it for comprehensibility. But on the top of the forms that I'll be using, I'm going to vary the call sign of each transmission. So for example, it might be British Airways or Lufthansa or Aer Lingus. And we'll see if that variation has an effect on the perceptions of comprehensibility. So I'm going to be running experiments like this to gather up all this data to show how pilots and air traffic controllers are communicating with each other and how the context, the aeronautical context, is affecting that communication. The challenge is to use that data to actually impact the industry directly. So I'm going to raise the profile of the risk of language proficiency with the insurance companies that are exposed to that risk. I'm going to use the data from my research and what's called stochastic modeling to build a liability scenario and show insurance companies how this issue is impacting their business. And in this way, the goal is that they will actually raise the premiums of the airlines that are not using proper aviation English testing. And so at the end of the day, this thesis is all about using linguistics to reinforce the safe and expeditious flight of aircraft all over the world. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone. So our judges have come to decisions about our third, second and first place. So the third gets $1,000 towards their research, not unfortunately for them to spend the research. Second place $2,000 and the first place $5,000. And of course the best master's student will be going to Wellington. Quite sure if that's the first prize or the second prize. And the top PhD student will be going to Australia. So Bridget's going to start us off.
Right, I'm very pleased to announce that the winner of the third place goes to Jess McHale.
Kia ora tata. I'm very proud to announce the second place, and it goes to Jack Jones.
I wanted everyone to win, so it was really hard. And so they've put me in charge of announcing the ultimate first prize. And yeah, so the first prize is Philippe Sultrop.
And once again, congratulations to all of our competitors. Well done. So again, join me in thanking everyone this evening.